Chapter 1. Sleep like dead men, wake like dead men. It'd been a normal day at the archives for Martin Blackwood. He sat and looked over the reports he'd been given until his back started to hurt, upon which he went to the break room and made tea for everyone. Tim and Sasha were already sat in the lounge discussing a case they were about to follow up on, so they were easy to deliver their mugs to. Sasha's with no milk and 3 sugars in a light blue mug that stated, "I put the C in research," with a wave motif. Tim's with a splash of milk and no sugar in a plain pink mug. And John was where he always was, in his office. His mug was plain black, other than one tiny stretched cap that made the handle, and he took his tea with a strangely large amount of milk and no sugar. John ignored him, as always, but Martin knew he drank the tea he bought, so he didn't care as much as he used to. He returns to his desk and keeps looking over the reports. He doesn't really drink the tea. He sips it until it gets cold, and then he leaves it there. He keeps reading, but at some point his mind gets lost. Why was he the only one ever sent out on his own? He knew John didn't like him. He'd listened to the tips. He wasn't stupid, no matter what John thought. He just liked being nice. He is nice. Maybe John really did just want Martin dead, like he'd said, implied, whatever. Regardless, arsehole bosses were sure plenty around London. Of course they were. When he'd worked in that corner store, his boss had been... Well, he'd say worse, but didn't think David had wanted him dead. He'd just been awful. He particularly enjoyed puffing clouds of cigarette smoke into Martin's face. He kept accusing him of thieving notes from the till. So, what? He'd live with it. He had to. He kept reading. It's a normal day in the archives, after all. It was hours later when he heard the crash. It wasn't particularly loud, but it was loud enough to go have a look, per se. So he did. Tim and Sasha were following behind him. They all went to stand in the doorway of document storage. 2 strange men in the document storage room. Upon seeing them, he noticed he made some kind of noise, but he isn't sure what it sounded like. One was smaller and real thin. He had a jumper drooping off of one shoulder, exposing more of the small scars that seemed to cover parts of his face and hands. There was a line across his neck, as if someone had tried to slice his throat open. The main thing Martin took in, though, was a strange likeness to John. But John's hair was cut neatly, not long and dishevelled, and definitely not that grey. He was covered in a layer of strange grime, and almost something that looked like dried blood, but it couldn't be, right? The other, who looked remarkably like him, but couldn't be him because he was him, and his hair wasn't white, nor his eyes quite that colour. This one wasn't as scarred as the other. There's a faint line across his throat, but that's all Martin could see. Other than his cracked glasses and the grime that covered him, he looked normal. The one that looked like John raised a hand, opened his mouth as if to speak, but only a faint noise escaped. They both promptly collapsed. Martin thinks he said some kind of expletive. He knows Tim did. Sasha just yelled. John, who Martin hadn't even realised was there, spoke first. Good Lord, how did they get down here? There was a pause, and Martin knew it was going to be his fault. We have no idea, boss, Tim shrugs. They were just here. They've got us in somehow. One of you has to know something. John is scowling, glaring at all 3 of them with an unnecessary amount of vitriol. The 2 men wake up after 3 hours on the floor, most of those filled by the archival staff, vaguely interrogating anyone who could have possibly walked in. Not that the aforementioned archival staff knew that, given they were currently locked in a heated argument, because this could not actually be supernatural, Tim. There's no chance of any of this sort actually exists, and this certainly isn't proof. Which is why none of them heard the soft creaking as wood as someone came to stand in the doorway. The one that looked like Martin had apparently awoken first. They noticed him, eventually, but John just kept ranting, and given his back was to the one that looked like Martin, that was fair enough. He noticed when they all seemed to droop slightly and spun around to face the interloper. Hello? The one who looked like Martin spoke, and he certainly sounded like Martin, if his voice was slightly grittier, and he waved a hand. Who are you? John, glaring again, this time at the one that looked like Martin. Martin Blackwood? The one that might actually be Martin said. What? Yeah, is it? The one that might actually be Martin's eyes seemed to be watching everyone else in the room, recognition sparking in his eyes for everyone except Sasha. Which Martin thought was strange, but this person introduced himself as him, so strange this was a given. Cannot be Martin Blackwood. That's Martin Blackwood. John points at him. Why would you want to know the year? The whole date might be better, actually. The one that was might actually be Martin shrugged. And I am. Martin? Now that voice, Martin could probably recognise anywhere. It was very obviously Jonathan Sims' voice, but for some strange reason, it was saying his name in the fondest tone of voice. If it was not Jonathan Sims, because John would never, in his life, sound that soft. Oh, hi, John. The one that might actually be Martin spun around to speak to the interloper. I think we time travelled. You what? Exclaimed John as Sasha said that time travel might just explain things. Yes, it seems so. The one that looked like John squished next to the one that would actually be Martin in the doorway, then said, I think we should all sit down. And they do. We all go in the break room. Sasha, Tim, and Martin squished almost uncomfortably on one of the couches. The ones that looked like John and Martin on the other. Well, John sulked, arms crossed in the corner. Seem you have questions? The one that might actually be Martin said. I think I would. The one that looked like John leaned into the one that might actually be Martin, head on his shoulder. Who actually are you? Sasha asked. If you're actually Martin, what year are you from? Still Martin Blackwood. And 2018? Not sure. The year has been long, says the one that might actually be Martin. And not just metaphorically. Ignoring John's annoyed muttering about what he's saying, it clearly isn't true. Tim asks, what do we call you then? Because I can't keep thinking about you as the one that looks like. It's getting annoying. Tim laughs. I don't. The one that might actually be Martin makes some awkward noises. Last names then, says Sasha. Ever sensible. Future ones can be Blackwood and Sims. Hey, why am I Sims? He protests, lifting from Blackwood's shoulder. I have seniority. Not here you don't, says John, still sulking. Ah, right. Sorry. Sims looks at John as if remembering something. You don't believe us. Sure. You look like me and Martin, but time travel is far too fetched for me to believe. Fine, shrieks Sims. Mr. Spider wants more. The all watch as John goes extravagantly pale for his complexion. Well then, he says, clearly shaken. Tim shakes his head, questioning if that's all they had to do to shake the great Jonathan Sims. Sasha makes a noise between a snort and a sigh and continues. So why are you here? That I suppose to change things, not let everything that happened happen again. Sim seemed to ask himself. What date is it? 29th of February. Why? The pair suddenly go very pale, very fast. So, Carlos Vittori, Martin,